You already know what it is. UFC 5 official gameplay trailer. The deep dive. Let's go.
Welcome to the EA Sports UFC 5 gameplay deep dive. My name is Marshall Mind, and today we'll be talking about some brand new features designed to deliver a whole new level of MMA authenticity and immersion to the game. We'll look at features like the real impact system, new striking animations, doctor stoppages, a brand new exciting submission system, and plenty more. And with that, let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about today is the Real Impact System, which is essentially a catchphrase for the conglomeration of health events, facial injuries, full body hit reactions, overall authentic damage, and the impact they have on a fight. Unlike previous games where injuries to the athletes were mainly superficial, UFC 5 introduces an innovative impact system that accurately reflects the physical toll the athlete undergoes during a match, which influences both the athlete's condition and the ultimate match results. This is demonstrated visually with the all-new damage icons. Now, before we get into these icons, I can't stress enough just how much more impactful this new damage system is going to be in UFC 5. The few times that I've played against another player, every single time I got cut, it was like, oh my god, you really got to reevaluate what you're doing. You got to watch out. In UFC 5, as you guys are going to see once we start talking about these damage icons in a moment, getting cut, getting damaged, it really means something and has an impact in the way the fight actually plays out. The vision penalty icon appears when an athlete gets cut in areas of the face where bleeding could lead to visual impairment, like the brows, the eye, the forehead, etc. This leads to an increase in the amount of damage you take on the affected side while the penalty is active. If no further impact occurs to the affected location in 30 seconds, the penalty is lifted. The penalty is also lifted at the start of a new round. The breathing penalty icon appears when an athlete sustains an injury to the nose or mouth. This impact will decrease the short-term stamina recovery for as long as the penalty is active. If the athlete can protect against subsequent damage to the affected area, the penalty will be lifted in 30 seconds or at the start of a new round. So the stun icons are broken down into 3 different icons: the head stun icon, the body stun icon, and the leg stun icon. The head stun icon appears as the result of any health event to the head. The body stun icon appears as the result of any health event to the body. And the leg stun icon appears as the result of any health event to the leg. The health icons are also broken down into 3 different icons: the heart icon, the arm health icon, and the leg health icon. These icons authentically represents the effect a submission attempt can have on an athlete. The heart icon appears when a player loses a chunk of their maximum stamina due to a deep choke. The goal here is to accurately represent how chokes, especially deep ones, can negatively affect an athlete's overall stamina. The arm health icon is meant to signal a loss in maximum block health due to a deep arm submission. Whether it's an armbar or a kimura, overextending the arm realistically leads to a reduction in blocking ability, and UFC 5 represents this authentically. The leg health icon signals a loss in permanent leg health when a player survives a deep leg lock. Leg locks, of course, are some of the most potent submissions an athlete can endure. So whether it's a deep heel hook or a calf slicer, surviving will not leave the athlete unscathed. And UFC 5 authentically represents this reality. The next thing we'll take a look at is doctor stoppages. For the first time in the EA Sports UFC series, the doctor stoppage will now be another viable way for players to end a match. The doctor stoppage icon will appear initially as a result of any facial injury, not including injury to the mouth. At first, the icon appears yellow, but as subsequent impact is received on the affected area, the icon will appear more red. The more red the icon becomes, the closer the ref is to halting the match briefly and requesting a doctor check. If the doctor examines the injury and determines it is not severe enough to warrant a stoppage, he will exit the cage and the match will continue. However, if he examines the injury and determines that it is indeed significant enough, he will signal to the ref
It's all
and the match
over.
will end. The introduction of Dr. Stoppages to UFC 5 is just another way that the game truly delivers an authentic mixed martial arts experience. But it also adds another layer to gameplay. Being defensively sound has never been more important, and because of this, there has been some significant enhancements to the core defensive tools in the game. Footwork, blocking, head movement, and lunges have all received significant upgrades, resulting in a substantial improvement in their reliability for defensive maneuvers. Now, this is an area that a lot of players definitely complained about in UFC 4, right? Like pressure is too strong, block breaking is too strong, being defensively sound in UFC 4 is not as easy as it's supposed to be. And don't get me wrong, in UFC 5, when you run into a player that knows exactly what they're doing, you can definitely still get run down with strikes. But as we start talking about these new defensive tools in UFC 5 and how they've been upgraded, how they've been buffed, once you master these and once you start using them as intended, you're going to notice you'll have a lot more success in UFC 5 than you did in UFC 4 when it comes to dealing with pressure and just overall aggression.
That's good.
In UFC 5, head movement in all directions is far more responsive.
Okay.
It is faster and it costs less stamina.
faster,
In
Chad.
addition to that, the vulnerability incurred while using head movement has been reduced. Altogether, these advancements collectively establish head movement as an even more potent defensive tool in UFC 5.
So
Lunges
you
will
lose a
now
whole
also
bunch of
cost less stamina as well as concede less
Lunges too.
vulnerability, which means players will be able to use them a bit more freely compared to UFC 4. And let's not forget about footwork. The significance of the footwork stat has been amplified in UFC 5, specifically when it comes to locomotion. Athletes with a high footwork stat will move noticeably faster, and athletes with low footwork stats will move slower.
That makes sense.
So if your goal is to operate from the outside and be slick and run circles around your opponent, this will be a much more viable strategy in UFC 5. Now, this topic of defense has always been a nagging issue in the EA Sports UFC community, and I really wanted to dive a bit deeper into this just in case I missed something, which is why I sat down with Yves Gomez, an EA Sports UFC developer who, by the way, used to be a game changer. Some of you probably already know who this is. He explained to us a little bit deeper in regards to what we've already talked about, right? With the head movement, the lunges, the locomotion. He goes a little bit deeper and not only explains to us what they did, but also why they did it. What was the logic behind why they made those decisions that they made? So here's Yves talking about these changes. All right, so can you talk about how vulnerability is going to affect head movement in UFC 5?
The frames part of it is just the first part, like the first buff, and it was also buffed regarding the stamina cost. It now costs a lot less across the board, and the vulnerability was decreased and the mitigations were increased. We also added mitigation to when you try to dodge sideways against a frontal attack and it still catches you. So if you're trying to dodge a jab but you don't get out of the way in time, it will still grant you a little bit of vulnerability because you're slipping out of the way. So it's like the punch is glancing off your face.
All right, so earlier when you said frames, are you saying that fighters with higher head movement stats will now have access to more evasive properties, which will allow them to evade shots a lot easier than, say, UFC 4?
Very slightly. It was buffed across the board by one frame. The low end is not as low as before. So a fighter with a bad head movement stat won't be as slow. And as the fighters get tired throughout the fight, they don't get chunks of slowness added to them. But overall, the timing of it is slightly faster and varies more granularly.
And what about with lunges when it comes to vulnerability? Has that been reduced, increased? Like, what are we going to see in UFC 5 when it comes to that?
Good question.
When you lunge away from a strike, you take less damage.
What about when you lunge directly into a strike? Are we still going to have vulnerability with that?
It's a
Has
straight
that been
knockout,
increased? Has that been
KO,
reduced?
all of that.
That gives you vulnerability, which has been decreased.
Okay, it's been
It was
decreased.
a bit much, It was like maybe the most common way of getting like a flash KO. You can see the block.
Yeah.
And in terms of the footwork stat,
Like the
right,
body
like showing
and
the
everything,
changes between the
leg,
fighters that are
you lunge into
faster
it.
and fighters that are a bit slower. Like we're definitely getting a bigger difference between those two fighters in UFC 5, right?
Yeah, in comparison to UFC 4, yeah, there's a bigger contrast now. More precisely, the high end stays the same. So someone with maxed out footwork stat will remain just as fast. The change is that someone on the low end of it will be slower.
Defense is not the only important aspect of a match though, and in UFC 5, going on the offense has never felt better. UFC 5 introduces brand new animations for punches, kicks, elbows, and
My
knees.
overhands
To
connected.
talk about a few, the new leg kick animation
Leg.
is beautiful, and the knees are so realistic and
knees.
powerful looking. The
John
new
Jones
pivot left hook
knees.
animation will come in handy when dealing with pressure, and the new front kick to the body
I like that. That
animation
was quick,
is
too.
snappy and beautiful.
Yeah,
But that's
snappy.
not all. With the power of next generation graphics,
Hey, the
visual
graphics is
cues,
lit,
as
man.
well as hit reactions showing just how impactful strikes
That's like a
are,
new
have
uppercut.
all been amplified.
Okay.
When you throw a strike and it makes impact with the athlete, improved facial deformation sends a ripple through the face and body. UFC 5 has also
good.
revamped striking controls to be more dynamic, giving players a lot more control over basic strikes, advanced strikes, as well as combinations. Unlike in UFC 4, where you had to press 2 buttons simultaneously to perform a strike as basic as an uppercut, in UFC 5, it is as simple as holding the right bumper and pressing either square or triangle for the lead and rear uppercuts. A new dedicated spin input has also been introduced to the game.
new
And so
spin.
rather than having to remember a multitude of button combinations for different spinning attacks, the X and circle buttons pressed together will always result in a spin.
What
And when
type
you
of
pair
spin?
that with another button input, like circle for example, your fighter will perform a turning sidekick to the body. The button input to
Yeah,
initiate a
gotta get
clinch
used
has
to that.
also changed, and it's a change that I personally really appreciate. It now maintains a uniformity with the takedown input, which enhances the overall experience. In UFC 5, triggering a clinch is as simple as simultaneously pressing square
wonder if they
and
still got
X.
them
But that's not all that was
spinning
done to the
kicks.
clinch. And I definitely had to find out from Eves if anything has been done to improve the clinch from UFC 4, because I know I'm not the only one that's curious about this. A lot
wonder
of
if they still
players
got the standing
who had
guillotine.
issues with the clinch, because let's be honest, man, it was a sore spot in UFC 4. A lot of those same players are going to be very curious. What was done? How was it improved? What changes are we going to see that will make our quality of life a lot better in UFC 5 in regards to the clinch? So here's Eves giving us some insight into what was done to the clinch in UFC 5.
What's up with the clinch?
Yeah, so we did a few things. The main thing is that it is easier to prevent people from clinching you by striking them. This one frustrating
Yeah,
thing is that, okay,
that's
you're
obvious.
going to clinch me. I'm just going to punch you out of it.
Yeah.
But in UFC 4, almost always you would punch them and they will clinch you through it as an exchange. Exchanges into the clinch can still happen, but if you're punching someone with a straight attack, we figured that it would make sense that that should be the thing that would kind of push their face away and not let them clinch you. So
Yeah, straight.
Any jab with straight will nullify a clinch attempt.
Okay.
Furthermore, any retreating attack, like any sort of retreating attack, makes the clinch not stick to you. You're
Okay,
moving away,
but
right?
can you do
So
things
you
in the
clinch
clinch
if you're using a retreat
when you
attack.
get clinched?
And we made more subtle changes to the flow of when you're striking someone as you're trying to escape the clinch. For a specific window, they can't block when they're actually exiting, right? That is still possible, but it is harder to do now, and it is especially harder from the cage single
can't
under
block.
position. But the defensive striking the clinch
Yeah, I love that.
is
I love that
generally
move.
more powerful than it seems. The truth is that if people clinch you through your strike, you actually have the upper hand. If you continue to strike, it will take them out of what they're trying to do. Like it will interrupt the knee that they try to throw you and stuff like that.
Now let's delve
trying to
into
see
what
that
I
clinch
consider
work,
to
man.
be the most exhilarating transformation in EA Sports UFC 5. The seamless submission mechanics. For the first
Hey, I'ma
time
have
in
fun with
EA
this,
Sports
man.
UFC history,
submissions,
submissions are
though.
now performed without relying on a minigame. In
All
earlier
right.
iterations like UFC 4, triggering a submission, be it a joint lock or a chokehold, necessitated engaging in a mini
Too
game to
many
secure
games.
or counter the move.
That's right.
This element was somewhat detached from the core grappling system. However, in UFC 5, this dynamic has been seamlessly integrated, making a groundbreaking evolution. Allow me to explain. Upon initiating a submission in UFC 5,
There
for
you go.
example, a guillotine,
Yeah.
you'll have two choices. You can choose to force your opponent to submit by crossing both feet behind their back
yep.
and squeezing, leading to a tap, or you can choose to advance to the mount, a more advantageous position.
Yeah.
And although you gave up the submission, you secured
There's
another
sub right
favorable
there, too.
position.
Several
As
subs.
the attacker, the direction of your inputs will always remain the same regardless of the submission. Up to submit, and down to advance to another dominant position. As the player who's defending, the directions of your input will also always remain the same regardless of the submission. Left to escape, and also
Do they
right
have the
to
settings
escape.
where you can put
Now,
on
I
legacy
understand
and
the
change it?
potential worry that this new submission system could oversimplify submission and make them too easy.
Yeah.
Well, rest assured, the team accounted for this concern because in tandem with the regular HUD displaying head, body, and leg health, an additional gauge now shows your submission health.
so you
Depending
got a
on the
submission
strength of the
health.
submission, your athlete's submission defense stats, as well as your current stamina level, it might require as many as 3 submission attempts to completely deplete your submission health. And when that happens, the submission is instantaneous. It is important to note that despite
So you
this
gotta- hey,
protective
real life
measure,
stuff, man.
one-shot submissions remain plausible in UFC 5. These occurrences are exceptional and typically happens when a player has severely mismanaged your stamina, granting the attacker a substantial stamina advantage upon initiating the
Yeah.
submission. When it comes to submissions in UFC 5, stamina is
Hey, I'm
king,
excited
so
to
make
learn.
sure to manage yours.
Excited to
Contextual
learn.
submissions have also been expanded
Ground
in UFC
game.
5. If you find yourself in side control and you try to escape to half guard by framing and bridging up, be careful because your opponent could very well counter that with an arm triangle. If you find yourself entangled in a rubber guard and you try to recover the full guard, also be careful because you could find yourself fighting off an armbar.
Armbar,
UFC
I
5
like it.
introduces a multitude of contextual
Okay.
submissions that once mastered imbue the ground game with a heightened sense of authenticity.
beautiful, man.
Adding to the authenticity of the ground
Yeah, they
game,
moving fast,
the ground
too,
and pound
okay.
system has
That
also
ground
been
and pound,
revamped.
though.
All new ground and pound animations from straight punches to hooks, including
hooks.
high impact elbows to
Ooh,
the
them
head and body,
elbows. Hey, that was
accurately
nasty.
captures the visceral reality
Yes,
of
sir.
ground and pound. And unlike past
That's what I like
iterations
to
of the
see.
game, when you
Ooh,
stop
he
the
done.
opponent on the ground, the reaction they give you is believable.
Yo.
So we've talked about the brand new submission system. We've talked about contextual
Yeah, I like
submissions.
that. I
We've
like
talked
that.
about the brand new ground and pound. But I'm sure a lot of people still have questions in regards to the core ground game, right? Like, how is it different from UFC 4? What else was done to it in UFC 5? And once again, I sat down with Yves Gomez, and he's going to talk about some changes that might not be immediately noticeable, but they'll still have a major impact in the way the game actually plays on the ground.
Alright.
If you have pretty much a whole round on the ground, your stamina, like your permanent stamina consumption, should be similar to if you have a whole round striking. The ground won't be like a refuge of almost no stamina cost anymore. With the new submission systems, seamless submissions, we added a lot of depth, but we didn't want it to be intimidating for new players or players who are starting to grapple. You can play grapple assist within submissions.
Grapple
it all flows
assist.
like for a casual player. Like it's pick up and play. You're not going to play at a high level, but you're not going to get stuck. Now there's no more meaning game, and when you're using grapple assist just continues to work as you get into the actual submission. You can use the submission intent to just keep going and finish the opponent. If you're defending, just trying to get up, you can keep just doing that. Or if you're trying to ground and pound, you can escape a submission right into a ground and pound position to punish the opponent for doing it. Do you try to submit you? You can even, as a defender, use the submission intent to counter a submission to one of your own if your fighter can do that. A lot of the fanciest things in this system actually happens a lot. You get to see a lot of cool
It's
animations.
funny how
because you're often
they're talking about
sure,
submissions
especially if you
and
have
they're
two
striking
beginners
right
playing
now.
with grapple assist.
They're not doing
you're
none of
constantly
that.
racing, and when you're racing, like, you know that's when you see the coolest stuff, right? We get into an armbar Like immediately, you try to escape, I try to finish. We go into a belly down armbar. You flip and then end up inside your leg. All
It would be
these
nice if
crazy
they were
stuff,
showing
really
that.
cool stuff actually
Okay,
happens a
I
lot
see the triangle.
when you're playing as a beginner. In your own pace, you can start to explore depths and changing your controls and so on and so
I
forth.
like that.
And there are more changes to the ground.
Straight into the
So
mount.
it was almost impossible to get to back mount and back flat positions, because when you're doing it, the people could just roll for free and end up back sitting, which is a little less dominant for you. They cannot do that for free anymore. If they have a stamina advantage, they can do that, just like in UFC 4. If they don't, they can't. So now there is a new contextual transition there for when you're trying to get
I wonder
back
how
mount
it is
and
whenever
trying
you
to roll.
like. Can you
Brand new
deny
result.
stuff?
I won't
like
say
the
what
other
it is,
game?
but it's not back sitting. Now it should be much more viable
And
to
drain
get to
somebody's
the actual
stamina.
back mount and back flat and use the submissions from there, which are supposed to be very juicy.
It would be
and
nice
they
if
are.
they was
With the
actually
real
showing back
impact
flat.
system, intuitive striking controls, improved defensive tools, and all new submission mechanics, EA Sports UFC 5 offers the most immersive, authentic, and exciting mixed martial arts gameplay experience to date.
Hey, it looked like it's about to be a great game, man. It looked like it's gonna be a great game. If y'all ain't pre-ordered that thing, go ahead and cop that thing. I know I'm personally getting it on PS5, and then I'm gonna buy another copy for Xbox Series X, because I don't know if it's crossplay. So, hey, we about to get out of here. Make sure y'all like, comment, hit that subscribe button. This is your first time here? Let's get it. Appreciate you.